my name is Paul Tilstone from Festive Road, and today I'm in conversation with Geert Behets from UCB to talk about the era of purposeful travel. Geert, welcome.
Hello, Paul. Nice to see you again.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, better than the weather, which is not too great today.
Don't talk to me about the weather. We're in England, remember. We have terrible weather compared to Europe. So you're new to being interviewed on this video series with Festive Road. It might be nice just to give us some context of your role and your remit within the organisation.
Yes, so I work for UCB. I'm based in Brussels because UCB's global HQ is based in Brussels as well. And my role reports into procurement. And I have actually two distinct roles. One is heading up the procurement team in Asia, which, of course, with the current pandemic is extremely practical because I'm so close to the team. And then my second role is, which I think is more related to this interview today, is a spend journey lead for global travel meetings and events, to put it all together. And you should compare that role to like a category specialist, but in a very broad sense, in the sense that I'm responsible to make sure that from A to Z, when people start thinking about, I should probably travel, until it's in the books, I design the process and I look at what tools we use, what policies are in place, etc. I do not run RFPs myself, although I work for procurement, but that is the main part of my role as a spend journey lead.
Great. I love the solutions, technology and supply. It just sort of trips off the tongue, doesn't it? Now, tell us a little bit, what do UCB do? Just give us some context there as well.
UCB is a pharmaceutical company. We've been around 90 years. And we used to be a diversified company. So a lot of people still remember us from actually the abbreviation stands for Union Chimique Belge, so Chemical Union of Belgium. So we don't do anything chemical anymore. That's why we only use the abbreviation. And we are now present in about a little over 40 markets. We have a specialization in immunology and neurology, with a sighting that we're developing on bones or osteoporosis and stuff like that. So
wow,
all pretty serious things. So if you don't know us, you should be happy.
Yeah, okay. I'll remember that. And you talked there a little bit about diversification. That links nicely to your background when it comes to diversity. Just explain what UCB Plus is and how you're involved.
Yeah, so UCB is very much into sustainability for the moment. It's a really big focus. And we see that a lot broader than just environment. And one of it is indeed diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the things that came from that is that we made a group called UCB Plus, which is for the LGBTQ. I think they keep adding. So can you imagine that it would have said UCB LGBTQI? That was hard. So we just made it UCB Plus, and that sounded a lot easier for people to remember.
Yeah, okay. It's a very changing landscape we all have to stay connected with and on top of as well. So a really important role. And I've no doubt that plays into the work you do within the travel function as well. So let's just start talking about that. How has your own personal perspectives and also big picture, your company's perspectives and the potential role for travel developed over the past kind of 6 months when you start to think about the future of that travel program at UCB?
Yeah, actually, it fit in quite nicely in the total picture. So UCB already started slightly before the pandemic even, but then due to the pandemic, it really came into a next level approach on, we call it internally the stronger than ever. It means that we are looking at how can we be intentional in a lot of the things that we do. So not just for travel, but it's going to fit in, of course, very nicely with travel and the intentionality of travel or how we want to approach that. But it goes further than that. It's not just about travel. It will be like, okay, when you when you work from home, how do you decide that? Just think about it. Do I really need to go to the office, or can I work from home? Do I really need to travel? Or so that's the whole intentional part around it. And the way that we want people to really think about that, what value is that going to bring to you? Do you get anything out of it? And again, it goes on, how do I organize myself? How do I prioritize my projects? It has to go all through the organization, and that is the good thing about it. And then the last part that we want people to think about it, how is it going to affect others? So it could be your colleagues, it could be your suppliers, it could be your customers. It goes very broadly. And so UCB started doing that across the organization. And then, of course, that trickles into travel as well.
So I love that, because a lot of the people we've spoken to have started from the position of travel and thought about being more purposeful or intentional, as you describe it, and then sort of suddenly find that they're working through an organization that's thinking quite similar to them. What you're saying is, within UCB, actually the whole company's taken a position, and the leadership has driven that, of three things: being intentional, being value driven, and I think you described the third one as mindful of your consequences.
Indeed.
And they're three really powerful statements, aren't they? So how do you think that is going to shift what travel looks like within UCB? Have you defined travel types? Are you at the early stage of thinking about how this affects your travel, or you've already done it and you're signing off with senior leadership?
I think since UCB is not a really taking an approach of a mandated approach, it's not about having the sign off. It's more about, permeating the entire organization of thinking about that. So I would say that we are more to a point where between the last and the before last part. So where we want people to start thinking, what is essential travel? How does what travel brings value and what travel does not bring value? What meetings? Because of course it's not just about the travel part itself, but also about the meetings. And if we do meetings, will we do meetings online, offline? Do we need to be you had the nice expression, but of course now that we're in the interview, it escapes me. But being in the room, Zoom or room, that was it, right? Yeah, Zoom or room. And we're very strongly looking at that as well. So, but we want the business to make sure that they come up with because different parts of the business will have different needs. So it needs to really, they need to connect to it, and they need to define those essential meetings and travel themselves. And that's the point where we are now, to get people to think about it. Right now, people are still absolutely not traveling in general. We are down. When I looked at Q1, it's down really 90% compared to last year. So the urgency is not immediate, but we want people to start thinking about it. And as I said, since that is a global movement and a global way of thinking and approaching things, it fits in with the rest of the considerations.
So, given that these sort of three areas of intentional, value-focused, and mindful of consequences comes from the top, what have you been doing within your role to reinforce that? Have you been communicating up to travelers? Are you finding that they're already thinking in an intentional mindset, and so you're not having to worry about that? And if that's the case, then what are the implications for your travel program? How does that feed downstream when it comes to the program and your suppliers?
Well, that's a big question. It's what we see is that we have two types of travelers, right? You have travelers who indeed come to the conclusion themselves, like, I've traveled less, and so I am really going to be looking at when we can travel again, I'm really going to be mindful about, do I need to travel and make, and others are really waiting to be able to travel. So we want to make sure that we keep people thinking. That's the way we approach it in the travel right now. And we are linking it in also with our environmental targets. UCB wants to be carbon neutral by 2030. So that's an important business travel, as you can imagine, is an important part contributing to our CO2 emissions. And we want to make sure that we take this opportunity to keep that momentum going, because of course right now our CO2 emissions have been really down, which is great, and we want people to think about it. So we've kind of linked the two together, and we have worked out together with our partners at our agency BCD Travel. Advito has developed for us. They're developing a dashboard, which is practically done now, which is looking at real emissions, and at the same time, we've included in our online booking tool and in the agency questioning. So when people will be booking in our online booking tool for a one-day trip, the tool is going to have a little pop-up that says, this is a one-day trip. Are you sure that you could not do this over a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting or whatever? And keep people thinking like that. When you're traveling over there, make sure that you make a good choice. The first screen that they will see is, have you reflected whether the trip that you're planning is an essential trip? So we keep that momentum going, and we expect that will already have quite a good impact. Of course, we will only see that when people really start traveling again, whether there is indeed a decrease that is important enough for us to see that. And we expect that to be mainly have an effect, of course, on internal travel. I think we have two big buckets, right? We have internal travel and we have external travel. With our healthcare practitioners, our HCPs, we will still need to see them. We also see that with the meetings, we already see some Zoom fatigue settling in, as well with our internal stakeholders as with the external people who go like, well, sometimes we just like to see and meet people as well. The advantage of this whole evolution is actually that we reach more people now, and that is a very nice thing to see, that we are seeing a lot of silver lining in the crisis, and in the fact that people become more mindful, because we are seeing a bigger online participation to our events than we have ever had in real life. So I'm sure that will be an evolution that we will see in meetings, that there will remain a combination of virtual meetings and real life face-to-face meetings.
Yeah, it's interesting that this concept of, we say Zoom versus in room, but actually it can be a combination of the two, especially in the meeting sector, and the potential for the hybrid of physical and virtual to actually allow you to extend your engagement to far bigger audiences and wider audiences is really interesting. And I imagine it has all sorts of implications for the pharma world, which has been very heavily involved in the meetings and convention space.
Yes.
You've mentioned sustainability a couple of times. I also find that really interesting, because for me, it's a bit like a sort of turbocharger on this whole movement to really consider whether you need to travel or not. First and foremost, it's what's the value you're going to get out of that trip. But secondly, it's actually, remember, this isn't just financial cost, it's also about cost to the planet. So that's fascinating to me. What do you think the implications are going to be for your suppliers in the changes that you're going to start seeing within your program? Have you thought that far through? Have you connected to suppliers about these changes?
We have been in contact with our suppliers continuously. Our agency totally understand that there will probably be less travel done, especially in the short term. We don't know past 2024, we don't know how, as a company, we are going to grow. So maybe overall our volume will be back to a certain level of pre 2019 or 2020, because we will grow, of course. But at the same time, our partners are fully aware. And I think it's not like we are an exception. I think everywhere in the market you hear that it will take some time to get back to 2019 levels. So what I feel with the suppliers that we talk to is that they expect this, and most of them are actually quite willing to support, because even with the suppliers, sustainability has really gained. Airlines have taken the opportunity to retire planes that were not as fuel efficient, for instance. There is a lot more attention from everyone from that perspective. So right now, I see nothing but quite good support for that, and not many contradictions. But yeah, it's true. You need to keep talking to your suppliers and your partners.
Okay, great. When we first talked about this interview, I remember I asked you if you had actually read the Purposeful Travel Model, and you held up a copy and waved it on the screen. I'm interested to know how much of your thinking and your company's thinking is aligned with the thinking throughout that model, which was, of course, was devised with 10 other travel managers who were already thinking down that pathway. Is there anything extra that the people watching this video should be thinking about over and above what's in that model? Is there anything in that model that you challenge, or you think actually that doesn't apply to me? And I appreciate I've just thrown this question on you, Geert, but wondered if you had any thoughts like that.
I was expecting kind of a surprise question from you, Paul, anyway, so that's okay. Quite honestly, when I was going through it, I was surprised, because we all like to think that we're very original, and I thought like, oh, shoot, this is so much in line with what we're doing. You had different words for it, but actually, you said purposeful, we talk intentional, but the gist and the idea behind it is the same. I think you were talking a little bit more on different areas of types of travel. We mainly identify between internal and external travel. So there are small differences, but overall, I feel it is very much aligned with what we're trying to do. And I could completely find everything back. I think the steps were quite logical. And the only difference was that I had the advantage that our company was looking at it from a holistic point on a larger scale. So it kind of automatically fit in with the system. I did not have to go the other way around and introduce this into a company that had no idea of doing it that way. So that was the main difference. But for the rest, I saw nothing but comparisons, actually.
Yeah, I think that you're right. You pointed out the main difference is that definition of internal versus external, because the reason we went down the pathway of thinking of three types: customer, which of course has customer acquisition and customer management, organization, and people, is because each of those areas has an internal and an external component. But actually, the sort of the mindset of we can cut internal and we should just maintain external doesn't necessarily match with what's best for the business, and that's why we sort of challenge that the use of the internal and external. But
that's a good point. Yeah, because it's the same with, since we also, if you now extend the travel to the larger sense of also having meetings, that's where you get into the people part, because you will have team buildings internally. And the team buildings will remain an important part. And let's face it, we're going to go through our annual purchasing conference in not too long, and we're doing everything online, of course. Team building, that's a hard one. I mean, the rest you can do pretty well, but how do you do a good team building? And of course, some of our suppliers have come up with really good examples, and we're going to test one, so we'll let you know. But quite honestly, for that part, we are really looking forward so that we can meet again face to face, because we realize that the team building, there is nothing that's going to build a team as good as going through an exercise and being able to sit down and have a glass of beer or wine or whatever afterwards to talk about it. And you lose that a little bit, of course, in a virtual environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's where we have established our relationship through face-to-face advisory boards, and yeah, that's certainly stood the test of time. One of the questions was about sort of selling this concept into your leadership, but given that the whole concept and your three things, I'm going to say them again because I think it's really important that people hear those. I think they're really valid: intention, value-focused, and mindful of the consequences, which is absolutely fantastic. It sounds like you don't have anything to sell in. What you're essentially doing is just making sure that that program delivered is under that holistic approach. So you don't have the same challenges, I think, as other travel managers. You've got to try and sell in a purposeful approach. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think all my sales quality, because as you know, I worked in sales for 20 years before I joined UCB, is to waste. I mean, I don't have to sell it, so that's that's a bit of a pity from that perspective. On the other hand, of course, it really makes it possible for us to move rather quickly and easily because it isn't a hard sell in our company at all.
Yeah. Okay. So just before we wrap up, I'll just have a final opportunity really is there anything, having gone through this journey or going through this journey, is there anything else that you think the people watching this video would find particularly useful? No doubt you may think of something afterwards. You can just add it in the comments when we post it, but I thought I'd give you that opportunity before we wrap up.
I think for me, what is going to be very interesting is to see, because, you know, all this right now is pretty theoretical. Yeah. So I'm really curious to see how the proof will be in the pudding and how will it move. Will we really see those results, and will we have a good view on that? I think I hope so, because I think it will help for the well-being of everyone, because the travelers, let's face it, it's often taxing. So, but I'm really hoping that we don't slip back into our old habits, because that is always the problem with any program that you do, is you need to make sure that you keep an eye on what did we try to do, and are we there, and if not, how can we still correct it? So I hope that we can keep on doing that.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Intention is all well and good until something gets in the way, or there's a reason why you suddenly stop thinking like that. And maybe what's on our side, or you know, when you think about an intentional approach or purposeful approach, is that we've got a challenge to our normal behaviors over the past 12 to 18 months. Whereas if we were doing this in 2019, I think it'd be very difficult to suddenly start switching and thinking very differently. But you're right. Let's see what happens, and maybe we'll have you back in 6 to 9 months' time to see what the net result is.
That would be great. I'd look forward to that, hoping that the result is as good as we're expecting, of course.
Well, let's see. Geert, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and for giving us the insight into the way that UCB is operating.
Thank you for having me, Paul. It was, as always, it's a pleasure talking to you.
Great. So thanks for watching Festive Roads in Conversation With series. You can take a look at the Purposeful Travel Model on festive-road.com. You can subscribe below on YouTube to future conversations. And thanks for joining us this afternoon, and have a great purposeful year.